I love doing this presentation. I'm now given varieties of this presentation, actually, from crossbills to grosbeaks to honey creepers to a book presentation. I don't know, probably 15 times in the last 4 months, 20 times in the last 4 months, and I've done 13 podcasts as well. So, I wrote a book with Lillian Stokes. It's her 36th book, Finches, United States and Canada. Kind of going to walk you through this highlights of the book, but I am going to do a deeper dive than I usually do with crossbills and grosbeaks. So the backstory on, basically the book, I'm going to cover in this presentation the backstory and the main breeding finches. All I'm going to do only some of those, some eruptions. I'll touch upon some vagrant finches and finches of Hawaii that are also in the book, feeding and attracting finches, and then research and conservation. Um, the backstory on this really is, beginning of the pandemic, COVID pandemic in 2020, August 7th, as you see there, there was a flock of red crossbills that landed down the road from Lillian's house in New Hampshire at the Harris Center for Conservation and Education. And, she went down to the executive director, called her up and said, "Hey, Lillian, bunch of crossbills landing down here at the park." So every day. And so Lillian went down there, started, photographing them, recording them. You had read online, "Hey, send this to Matt Young for identifying them, the call type," and sent them to me. This is again beginning of the pandemic. It was also right when I launched the Finch Research Network with Tyler Orr, who's lives in Ontario, and he's the Finch forecaster, and a board of directors, which Tyler is on the board of directors of the Finch Research Network. We launched that with the Finch forecast, the following month after Lillian started photographing birds. And here we are, we had a pandemic that year, but there was also a Finch super flight, which I'll get into. And here's a picture that Lillian took, a couple pictures, and there's a spectrogram of, that she had sent or that she had recorded and sent to me to identify. That is type 12, kind of an up down. It was a new type that the Finch Research Network, just formally described in a journal, Frontiers in Bird Science. My backstory also starts with Crossbill. So the book, really my career, I can owe to Red Crossbills. It was in 1995. I finished a degree in hydrogeology, meteorology. I knew I wasn't going to go into that field at the time or when I finished the degree, because the most common job in the field at that time was something called lust. It was the assessment of leaky underground storage tanks, like old abandoned gas stations. So I bought a car, bought a pair of binoculars the end of that semester, May of 95, and I went and saw a Grateful Dead concert, believe it or not. And then got in the car the next morning after the concert and drove west to that location in the upper left there. That's Lower Falls at Yellowstone. And it was there at Yellowstone that a flock of crossbills flew in above me. I just started birding, but I noticed that they were extracting seeds, and it was really a seminal moment in my life. My whole kind of career and world perspective pivoted at that moment. It's amazing the power of birds on how they can kind of impact your life. And I watched them feed. And from there, I basically became a birder and ornithologist. And here we are 30 years later, having launched this Finch Research Network, which the Crossbill Project was really the genesis of that and also of the book. I've always been a broad-based Finch person, not just Red Crossbill, but obviously the biology with the Crossbill call types is kind of where the biology is most interesting in some ways. So there it is, pandemic. It was a super flight of finches. All the finches in the east erupted that year, and our paths, like I said, crossed over Red Crossbills and led to the book. So main breeding finches. I'm going to cover not going to really cover much of the western ones we cover in the book to keep this presentation somewhat shorter, even though we didn't really start until about 15 minutes late tonight. But I am going to touch upon some of the Western ones. So the Rosy Finches, which I think you just were speaking about, I know there was a Rosy Finch. There's been a Green Crown in Ontario, and it's really the only one that actually ever shows up in the East. When it comes to Great Crown Rosy Finches, which we cover in the book, there's really kind of two different groups within the Great Crown Rosy Finch. There's a Cloudlands Finch, which is this mountain breeder, uh, and then there's this island finch, which is Gracianuccia, that is found along the Aleutian Islands. And really, and there's also a Hepburn's kind of race where they're, full gray facial pattern, whereas, with the brown cheek group, the cheek is brown. Uh, with the island finch, it's a much bigger bird, actually, and it breeds at sea level, and it actually breeds in old abandoned buildings, as you can see there on the lower left. And the genetics is kind of new. Some of the most recent genetics that looked at suggest that the Aleutian Island birds could warrant being recognized at the species level. Black rosy finch and brown cap rosy finch, both listed as endangered by IUCN. And the Finch Research Network and myself, I'm part of a Rosy Finch working group project looking at this bird. I'm a co-lead on the Evening Grosbeak working group, which is a road to recovery bird. There's a Rosy Finch also working group, but it's not designated a road to recovery bird. The two southern Rosy Finches that I show here are the ones that are most imperiled because of climate change, and they're most southern. There is encroachment of woody vegetation on the mountain peaks, and some of the species are moving up slope. And there is significant concern around these two species. But, the problem with Rosy Finches, unless you're like mountain goat and like to climb at 14, 12, 14,000 feet, there's just not a lot of data for them. The declines the data does show that they're in decline, but trying to get really good data year after year is challenging because of their elevation that they breed at. I am going to cover kind of two of the more general common finches in the East. House finch. So one of the beautiful things that we did in this book, and a lot of people have been kind of commenting about, is we kind of combined natural history with science, with storytelling and narrative writing, prose writing. Lillian would write, in all of the book, if you look at the beginning of each of the main species that we cover that breed in the United States and Canada, she does these quick takes, which are these creative essays for more of the common birder, not the like hardcore birder, to kind of get a feel for the story, the backstory on each of these species, and they kind of bring the personality to life. A lot of people here in this crowd probably know that the house finch is not native to the east, actually. And the interesting backstory is there was literally people were seeing house finches show up on Christmas bird counts in the 1940, like around 1940, and they started to figure out like where were these birds coming from, and they found out that there was a pet store on Long Island that was literally selling them as Hollywood finches. And one thing led to another. Uh, the government was actually going to kind of like close in and shut down that operation, or at least the killing of house finches. And before they did that, the person released the house finches on Long Island, and they then expanded to become across the entire East, and can they meet the population in the West. And house finches is now found from coast to coast. And again, she tells this story, and it's a great. We these quick takes are really fun to read. House Finches, so as you can see there, once released in the East, they would take over and become one of the most successful range expansions in U.S. ornithological history. In only 50 years, House Finches colonized the eastern half of the United States. When it comes to these birds, there's regional dialects in the East, but not West, actually. And like with a lot of the finches, females actually do sing some of the time. Uh, there's a big sex ratio difference in many of the finches, with males being a lot more common than the females, and we don't know for sure why. We believe it has to do probably with some kind of behavioral difference between the sexes. The color comes from a dietary carotenoid that the males eat in their diet. And studies basically show that the females want to pick the reddest males because it is a sign of quality, or genetic quality, and better providers for that particular species. There's a similar thing in American goldfinch, believe it or not. Everybody knows goldfinch a lot. It's amazing when I give this presentation, depending on the audience, it is not rare to have somebody ask me, where did all my goldfinches go? It's the only finch here in North America that actually changes its coat, as we know. This is the summer plumage. But in the winter time, it gets this plumage in the upper right here. It's a much more kind of dull, uh, almost olive yellow colored bird, and it has more insulation. Basically, that's what happens with them. And again, new research, again, the females want to pick the brightest males. Comes again, the color comes from carotenoids, pigments, and female bill color is a status signal that settles disputes among females. So the color, the brighter the female bill gets, uh, the higher status they have. The winter finch forecast, as everybody kind of knows, hopefully in this group, Ron Pitaway, rest his soul. He no longer is with us. Ron was a mentor to me and Tyler and to so many others. Started the winter finch forecast in 1999. It was the same year I actually started an eruptive bird survey for Cornell, using bird source, which predated eBird, believe it or not. But as we know, the winter finch forecast just focuses on the eastern part of the country because while it started out originated in Ontario, and that's always been the thought, is to keep it mostly Ontario based. It covers the east, including the Midwest, but the West is a lot harder to predict finch eruptions because of altitude topography. It's now done by Tyler Orr, who is we put it out through the Finch Research Network. I work closely with Tyler on this, and he's a board member of the Finch Research Network as well. Here, it's a citizen science driven project. The Finch Research Network has a unofficialist project, Become a Finch Forecaster, where you could go out and put in your sightings and upload photos and give assessments and ranks of different conifer and deciduous tree species on what you think their food crop looks like, whether it's poor or average or great. Those dots on the map are all of the participants that actually send their reports every year to Tyler. And that's how the Finch forecast is put together every year. It's basically almost 100 people from coast to coast, from the Maritimes to British Columbia, Alaska, and along the northern tier states. They give us reports. Tyler kind of puts that together, and then we discuss and we put it out every year towards the end of September. It's one of the most highly anticipated, ornithological articles to come out every year. As I said earlier, 2020, 2021, I could not have a better time to launch the Finch Research Network than that year because, everybody was kind of turning the birding and looking in their backyards because we really couldn't do much then. I mean, with the pandemic, and it was an absolute incredible flight of finches that year, and it was really a number of different things came together at the same time to lead to that super flight. It was a generational cone crop on the spruce trees. So it was a once in a 20-year cone crop. There also is a continuing spruce budworm outbreak across Quebec and Ontario and also parts of the Maritimes. And also, finch eruptions are kind of cyclical and they have these natural cycles. All that stuff came together, and the birds, again, erupted out of the boreal forest in numbers not seen in about 25 years, or at least 20 years. Um, Unfortunately, we no longer have hoary redpoll, as you can see there. Hoary redpoll in the middle left. Purple finch. We also have a purple finch project. The Finch Research Network does. A lot of people don't realize this. New to science. We have it in the book. I have a paper that's going to be out soon. The two different subspecies have very different. There's different plumage traits to some degree. The western one tends to have a little bit more of a muted, even slightly olivey looking color to it at times. But the call type is quite a bit different, as you can see on these spectrographs here. And the song is also quite different. So this is a small project. I would love to find a student that we could put like in British Columbia where there's a contact zone between these two in southern British Columbia and get a handle on whether there's any kind of hybridization going on. Pine siskin, another one of the winter eruptive winter finches. When we again launched the winter finch forecast, it was, Audubon ran an article in October of 2020 that siskins had taken over the country. There were so many. You could have even said siskins had taken over the continent. Um, there was so many siskins across particularly the lower 48 that year. As you can see on this eBird map, the deepest purples, a lot of them are across the southern part of the United States. Of course, British Columbia and Western Canada always has lots of siskins, but that year there was just siskins everywhere. Um, there's a rare green morph, about 1% of the males. That's that picture in the upper right. It's kind of a poorly named bird. We cover this in the book. It kind of has a muted, heavy streaking and kind of this muted kind of yellow over the brown plumage that kind of gives them a greenish kind of hue to them. It's a food generalist. Evening grosbeak, history of eruptions, an amazing bird, really wasn't really commonly known to the eastern half, or I should say the northeastern or eastern maritime provinces. It wasn't really known all that much until about the late, like 1870s, 1860s. Um, and with each successive eruption west to east, it became more and more established. A lot of people think it followed this baited highway west to east. They love to feed on box elder samaras, which is actually a maple tree. And it was with each successive eruption, more numbers would move east. They found these bungworm outbreaks, and it was based by like the 1940s to the 1960s. They were established as confirmed breeders in all of the eastern part of the continent, except for obviously the southeastern United States. Um, at 68 to 85 outbreak of budworm, 55 million hectares were affected in the boreal forest in that outbreak. Uh, Drivers of finch eruptions, you have conifer seed, obviously, almost all of the finches to some extent. Let me go back there. Almost all of the finches are, conifer seed is a bit of a player, particularly with crossbills because of that adaptation. Siskins are kind of a generalist. They're part, conifer seed eater, part deciduous seed eater, part part even weed seed eater. Uh, Birch catkins or alder catkins are a big driver of red pole eruptions. So whether there's a big birch or alder crop is a big driver. And like I said, with grosbeaks, they're a budworm specialist, really. And purple finch is a bit of a budworm specialist too. And then pine grosbeak is a frugivore, basically. Mountain ash crops really drive whether we're going to see big numbers of pine grosbeaks in the southern part of the province and here in the eastern parts or the northeast. Evening grosbeak, again, amazing. So Lillian wrote some prose and put some quotes in there. She had a really interesting quick tape about an evening grosbeak, just a gorgeous bird. But I'm just going to mention here. So we have an evening grosbeak project. There's a road recovery bird. It's a project that we've been putting bands and tags on birds now for the last 3 years. It's a project we continue to fundraise around. There's 5 different subspecies with 5 different call types. A lot of people don't realize there's a call type phenomenon in the evening grosbeaks as well. There's not a call type phenomenon in most of the finches, but it does exist in crossbills or I should say red crossbill, evening grosbeak, and at least purple finch. So here are the 5 call types, the spectrograms of them. I'm going to play 2 of them. We only get type 3 here in the east. But type 1 is the eruptive one out west. It's the one that roams around the west like type 3 does here in the east. Type 2 is a Sierra Nevada bird. Type 3 or type 4 is a Rocky Mountain bird. Type 5 is kind of a sky island bird into Mexico. And here is type 1. Kind of a pure tone whistle compared to the ones we have here in the east. It's an up down kind of on the spectrogram. And here is type 3, which is a much more ringing, some people would say kind of sleigh bell sounding bird. So quite a bit different sounding. Evening grosbeak decline 50, it's 92% decline in 50 plus years now. Here's a trend map, as you can see here, over the last, since 1960 to 2020, 92% decline. There does seem to be a bit of an uptick in some areas. You can see in this trend map of eBirds, they have some blues in the Maritimes where there is some increases being noted. That likely has to do with budworm outbreaks. So here's the working group. It's again a collaborative with the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program, Powder Mill Avian Research Center, Carnegie Museum of Natural History. And it was just 2.5 years ago that we were approached to take on as a co-lead the Evening Grosbeak Road to Recovery project. There's only 5 road to recovery birds, and we continue to fundraise to put the actually we have a pending project, but also a tagging project, putting tags and satellite tags on birds, and we're starting to work with a lot more scientists in Canada. Actually, it's really nice to see a recent really engagement with Canadians on this particular project. Junior Tremblay and a few others are also looking into helping put tags on birds this hopefully this winter here in the next 2 months, next 3 months. So in the working group, there's over 60 people in it. We have priority teams, diet, mortalities. We have the connectivity population dynamics, which is the tagging piece of the project. And then we're looking at habitat changes as well. Climate change is kind of the big elephant in the room. And the declines, they're clearly tied into boredom cycles, habitat change and logging. There's also disease, mycoplasma, so pink eye or conjunctivitis, I should say, just like with house finches. Evening grosbeaks do show some susceptibility to it. They're also one of the most susceptible, as are all of the finches, to window kills at feeders, believe it or not, because of their sociality and flocking nature. The more birds you have in the backyard with finches, or any species for that matter, the greater chance one could, smack into a window. So it's really important to put the windows at far enough distance that they can't do harm to themselves. They are, evening grosbeaks are number one on the bird banding gland database for window collisions. Field operations, we use these bow nets. We would never obviously trap birds more than like a few because you want to be able to handle them in enough time to be able to process them and get some information. We're trying to get information on full annual cycle information from like winter grounds, the breeding grounds, so you get a handle on maybe trying to figure out why the losses. So here's the total tagging banding summary. So we're up to, again, when it comes down to the populations, it's a very small number of birds, really. But as you can see, there's been quite a bit of effort put into this. We've tagged birds in Maine, Pennsylvania, New York, Minnesota, and Utah. Can't do Modus tower or nano tags in the West or even the Midwest because there's not enough towers. But here are some of the Modus tower results. So, we're showing connectivity from areas to the south up to areas in Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So it's pretty exciting when you start to piece these maps together. Here's some of the satellite tags, as you can see. Again, same kind of thing. Amazingly, a bird that we actually tagged in Minnesota at Sax-Zimbalde, where I just was, actually went across the long fetch of Lake Superior and settled in Quebec in a budworm outbreak. So pretty fascinating to see this stuff in hand. And so there you can see some of the strength of connectivity between winter grounds and breeding grounds. Those areas in red and orange are active, non-active budworm outbreak areas. So a lot of these birds are going back to budworm areas. We actually were able to document a range expansion of type 1 in the west when we went to Utah last year. We did not know that we knew type 1. It's a range expansion for type 1 on the breeding grounds. We know they erupt throughout the west, but we didn't know how much they bred in the interior where type 4 is. But apparently type 1 and type 4 breed in the Utah area. And it was a range extension of at least a couple 100 miles for type 1. Pine grosbeak, 5 different subspecies. Again, we only get the one here in the east, subspecies lucara, also known as the tega subspecies. Just a beautiful, beautiful bird, and also one of the birds that we do in the winter finch forecast. Red pole, been in the news a lot the last 8 months here, 6, 8 months. There's only just one red pole species now. There's been a debate for many decades on whether it was one or six. But there a paper that was published in 2015 kind of hinted upon, that they should be recognized as one species. That actual study started at my house in Cortland, New York. I had an incredible, relatively smallish flock of red poles with only about 65 birds, but very, very different looking birds. Lots of variability. I invited the Cornell folks out. I was at Cornell for 15 years, and they came out, uh, took some samples of birds and did some blood work on them. And basically, then they actually increased the study to make sure they had nominate birds from Greenland, where the nominate Hornomani, hoary redpoll, can be found. And in that study, they found that a chromosomally inverted supergene controls for that frosty look. And so they're almost genetically quite similar, almost identical. And so they were proposed to be lumped this past year, and then that change went into effect just in I think it was September. Red Crossbill complex again, kind of where I've made my name the most over the years. I've listened and identified, over 20,000 recordings. The most common species in the Macaulay Library collection or the Eber collection at Cornell is Red Crossbill by far. There are 32,000 Red Crossbill recordings in the collection. The next closest is about 10,000 recordings less. So, the Red Crossbill Project was really the genesis of the Finch Research Network. Um, again, evolving species, incipient species. Um, I'm not necessarily a splitter when it comes to crossbills, or a lot of species, actually, believe it or not. Might be contrary to what a lot of people might think, but that's kind of where my thought is on a lot of these. Here, this is from my book with Lillian. Kind of, we give a outline of a chart with all the specs of the different looking call types. I'm gonna play. Whoop! I don't know why I just did that. I'm gonna play a quick video here. Good friend of mine is no longer with us. Tom Johnson took this video of a red crossbill extracting a seed. This very same event that changed my life at Yellowstone 30 years ago. Oh, come on. Let's see here. It might not let me play the video, it looks like. Let's see here. Hope it will. It's an amazing video there. Not really sure why not everybody studies this species. It's so amazing. I'm somewhat joking there, but just again, that bill kind of used as a lever to open the scale, and then the tongue comes out, grabs the seed, and literally kind of shucks the seed from the seed coat. I'm just gonna play a little bit of like learn the sounds and how to read a spectrogram. So here's a Constantine pendula at full speed. So it almost sounds like somebody taking a finger over a comb. Our brains have a hard time processing speed in real time. So I'm slowing it down here for half speed. You can really hear the descending sound. Your brain can hear it. It's processing. Play that one more time. So I'm going to dive into crossbills and how they forage and how the different sounds. They don't nest necessarily all year long. There are records of almost every month. They really nest in two main cycles. One, July to October, utilizing newly developed cone crops, and then January to April, utilizing the last remaining cone crops. Red crossbills have a stronger jaw musculature and can actually utilize more conifer cone species than white-winged crossbill can. I did these foraging charts. They're pretty new. A lot of people, have really raved about them. There is a popular theory that, by one scientist, Dr. Craig Bankman, who has done a tremendous amount of great work on red crossbills. He really believes in this kind of key conifer concept that they each of the types are really keyed in on one particular species of conifer. I think us, at least at the Finch Research Network, which I have a board of directors of professors at university, four different universities, and one that's been Dr. Tom Hahn that's been working on crossbills and finches for the better part of since the 1980s as well. There's really, I think, three different strategies, probably one that is more specialized, one that is more nomadic, and then there are eastern types where we don't really have the densities like you do out west of red crossbill, are more generalized in diet as well. So type two, as you can see in the upper left there, they utilize a ton of different species for feeding and even nesting. Um, they are most common out west in ponderosa pine, which is what they're often associated with, or they called the ponderosa pine crossbill. It just implies that they're flying around looking for that, and they really aren't. Um, it's a nomad. We had a huge eruption of them here in the east last year. Asher crossbill now, used to be known as Titan, is more specialized, so it definitely has kind of a key conifer concept. And then this type 12 here in the east, again, it is conifer switching, looking for the best rich patches of conifer seed. So type 9, for those that don't know, it was 1996. We found birds in one small area of Idaho. And he asked himself the question, are there areas of east of the Rockies where there's crossbills and there's no tree squirrels? And is there lodgepole pine there? And he found that in Cassia County, Idaho. And it was there that he started studying them and doing a mark recapture and recording them. And they sounded different. And even though type twos and fives regularly come into the South Hills, uh, Cassia Crossbill 99% of the time breeds with other Cassia Crossbills. So they're assortatively mating to call type. And with the call types, comes slightly different, you know, bill sizes with slightly different foraging, optimal foraging. So there's an implied ecological specialization. The interesting thing is, you know, 50% or 40% of the area of Cassia County in the South Hills burned 4 years ago. And now the Cassia County bill has showed up in areas of Idaho, or not Idaho, but Colorado, and even nested, and in Wyoming, and even in Colorado or California. The Red Crossbill complex, type 2, as I said, ponderosa pine is what Dr. Bankman calls it. I'm going to play this. It's really widespread. And we had a huge, huge eruption of them last year. Here's type 2. Very choopy, choop, choop, choop. Type 2, as you can see, 2022-23 eBird maps versus 23-24. There were very few type 2s in the East that year. There are always a few type 2s around here in the East. But look at the 23-24 map. Just the Northeast, including Ontario, just had a ton of type 2s around in that eruption last year. Type 4, I call this kind of the happy crossbill. Not that common in the Northeast, but we had a massive eruption of them last year, like type 2s. It was the best eruption of type 4s in the East, at least since the 80s, maybe even back to 1970. It was that good. It's a very different sounding bird. It's a down up, click, click, click. Again, a nomad compared to the capture crossbill. And you can see the map here. No type fours at all, basically in the eastern part of the country, North America, 22, 23. But look at that map last year. For a crossbill, the cone cycle year really starts July 1, because that's when newly developed cone crops have started to mature. And as you get further out from that, so they, a lot of like the forage on the soft cone conifers because they have the most accessible seed to begin the cone cycle year. And as you get through the year, the cone cycle year, and you get out to like late winter, early spring, it's really just the hard pines that hold seed regularly, like the red pine, jack pine, pitch pine, pines like that here in the east. Type three is the one that we typically get in the eruption years more than any other. About every 5 years we get them, but it's been a little while now. And here is this, it's kind of a flat sounding squeaky bird, a little bit the smallest build of our North American crossbill call types as well. We go back there. Look at the zigzag down, down, up, down, or a lightning bolt almost. Type 12 was the one we just described, the Finch Research Network. It's up, down, again, kind of squeaky sounding a bit. More of a generalist. And these birds, amazingly, they do act like good biological species a lot of times. But during certain environmental conditions, when big cone crops form or there's widespread cone failure, is when hybridization seems to increase and keep some gene flow going. Type 1 is another one that you could get in Ontario too. It's most common in the Appalachians. It's a up down, kind of almost in between type 2 and type 12 in some ways. It's a small to medium size. It's more of a medium size. I have a typo there on build depth. So as I said on white wing crossbills, they'll start the year. They really are. When you step into like a crossbill complex, you really should put the white wing crossbill into that same complex. It is the boreal crossbill. I mean, it feeds really to start the cone cycle year. It's looking at white spruce and tamarack, which are soft cone conifers. And as you progress through the cone cycle year, it is around now, late winter, early spring, that they switch to black spruce a lot of times because black spruce is a semi-serotinous cone, meaning it has a gelatinous kind of gel around it that holds the seed in place, and it doesn't really open unless you have fire or some kind of extended like a extended, high temperatures. I'm going to zip through this last piece of this, last couple pieces of this presentation. In the book, we do cover vagrant finches. As Lillian writes here, the wrong bird in the wrong place at the wrong time that has the potential to send birders into mega rarity delirium. Any of us that have gone through periods of twitching or chasing birds know what this is all about. In North America, there are codes that are put in place by the American Birding Association. So code 3 is rare, code 4 is capable, code 5 is the mega rarity birds. Less than five or fewer times ever in the ABA area. I just have a couple of them here. I'm going to show Brambling actually has nested in the Aleutian Islands, but it is a code 3. I know there are records that have shown up in Canada plenty of time. Hawfinch is another one. And here's an interesting thing that we wrote about in the book. that Lillian dug up. Uh, there was a, a ship that was coming from China to California, and there was the person that often is on this ship on part of one of the crew actually often keeps thistle seed and some seed on the boat for passerine hitchhikers. And there was this one, you can go to the Zebra checklist, and there was a hawfinch, a brambling, and a rustic bunting, all in this little mixed flock that went from China to California. They weren't countable birds, though, because they were ship assisted. So kind of fascinating. Um, we also have a chapter feeding and attracting finches. I'm a big believer. Lillian was a psychiatric social worker before she was, you know, bird author, extraordinaire. And I've been doing the finch thing for 30 years. I have, I don't know, 30, 40 different published papers and now a book. But I also have 13 years working with special needs kids. Um, and we're both big believers in the power of birds and also the benefits from a mental health perspective with engaging with nature and engaging with birds. So she wrote this little short poem: look flashing golden black, see wings descending, watch flocking seed seekers, hear chirping sleigh bells, notice evening grosbeaks feeding, and realize you forgot to worry about anything while you were watching that flock. I know I'm losing my voice a little bit, but yeah, there's more and more studies coming out on the health benefits of engaging with nature and reducing stress and anxiety and depression and all that stuff. Again, there are dozens of papers on this topic. Again, feeding finches, right feeder, right seed. They all kind of attract different types of feeders. The grosbeaks are different types of finches. I mean, grosbeaks obviously need a bigger tray or hopper or platform feeders. Tube feeders are really popular, house finches and purple finches, and the other finches. And then the Niger seed feeders, the goldfinches, siskins, red bulls. Finch safety, again, clean your feeders, put them a good distance from windows so you reduce window kills. And that was Lillian's Yard, New Hampshire. She was a big believer in planting natives. And we have the Finch Research Network has feeder cams. I also work for the feed industry at Aspen Song Wild Bird Food as a wild bird product specialist and conservation coordinator. And the feeder cams, we have two of them, one in Wyoming and one in the Adirondacks. The one in Maine that we had for 2 years will be coming back next year as well. Um, the Hawaiian honey creepers, I'm just going to add this in there. We actually cover the honey creepers, which are Fringillidae finches. Um, the most amazing adaptive radiation really on Earth in a lot of ways. You know, Lillian writes, the beating wings onward and onward to strive and search and reach through millennia, dreaming of paradise awaiting them, going beyond the known limits of flight, arriving, achieving radiation, forms changing, becoming new bird species, paradise found, but eventually lost, or is it not lost? So the thought is 4 to 5 million years ago, a flock or two of Eurasian rose finches wandered, landed on Hawaii, and adaptively radiated out to 54 species. Many of them having bills that don't look like really what many of us have grown up to think a finch bill was like the Evie at the top there with that nectivorous bill. Um, Palila obviously does still look like kind of has a finchy looking bill. The akakiki is no longer now, it's functionally extinct. Avian malaria is the big issue on Hawaii. So I cover this in the conservation, research and conservation section of the book. We kind of focus on the honey creeper issue, the Grosbeak project, and the Rosy Finch project. This project, like the Evening Grosbeak project, are in continuous need of fundraising. And I'll get to more of this in a second. This one. Palila is a specialist Mamani seeds, really confined to high elevations. It's the one that still looks like a finch. It is related to bullfinches in Europe and pine grosbeaks here in the States. Koi, declining small population, restricted breeding and distribution. Malaria is also a threat. Kind of looks like a punk rocker in some ways with the fluff, the tufts there on the face. Again, these birds are just an amazing adaptive radiation. In fact, I wish Darwin landed on Hawaii. We'd be talking about real finches. Galapagos finches are now known as tanagers, which I don't mean disparaging against the Galapagos finches, but it's fascinating how taxonomy has been kind of mixed up over the last 10 to 20 years now. The honey creepers are known as Fringillidae finches, and the Galapagos finches are known as tanagers now. The Acciapola owl, just an amazing, amazing bird. Just look at that adaptation. The bill, the upper and lower mandibles almost act as two separate bills, working in unison. The lower bill taps on the tree like a woodpecker. The upper bill scoops the larvae out, basically. Just amazing again. Endangered, very range restricted. And the issue is all right. So I just mentioned Hawaii Amakihi is the only one that is resistant to avian malaria. It is a generalist. And so, as I say here, research and conservation, we cover honey creepers, grosbeaks, rosy finches as a chapter in the. But the issue with the honey creepers is this non-native Culex mosquito. It's been on the islands for 100 years. It carries malaria, and one single bite these honey creepers and they die. Now, whole global warming, mosquitoes restricted to lower elevations. They are now up and over the top of Kauai and Maui. There's about 4,000 feet on the Big Island in Hakalau that does not have mosquitoes. And the issue or the project, hopefully, that will save these honey creepers is this initiative the American Bird Conservancy leads. Birds, Not Mosquitoes, is a multi-agency partnership, and it's basically they're using mosquito birth control. They're introducing male mosquitoes with incompatible Wolbachia bacteria that they've been given. All mosquitoes kind of carry a bacteria in their stomach. And if you give the male mosquitoes an incompatible Wolbachia bacteria and then release them, when they mate with the females will lay sterile eggs, hopefully reducing the populations of the non-native mosquitoes down to zero and letting the honey creepers come back. Some of the honey creepers have been brought into captivity, and there is a captive breeding program, and there is talk of maybe releasing them back on the Big Island in this mosquito-free zone in Hakalau. The last, topics in research and conservation are more broad-based. For the Fragilidae, vocalizations obviously super important in this group. Call types that imply ecological specializations. Genetics always going to play a role. Why is there a lot more males than females? The sex ratio. Female song is also a very popular research topic right now. And then like mimicry, or imitations in finches. Why do almost all of the finches imitate other birds, but like house finches don't imitate, but Tennyson's finches and purple finches do? American goldfinches don't imitate other birds. Their descendants, Lawrence's goldfinch and lesser goldfinches, do. So that's usually important. Again, what drives eruptions? The winter finch forecast. Something we're always going to be interested in we have an iNaturalist project that you could become a finch forecaster and help us. And then logging is super, super important, particularly with crossbills. The older the trees, the more reliable and bigger the cone crop is from year to year. How you can help, again, record birds. When we launched the Finch Research Network, we wanted everybody to be involved, whether it was, somebody who was just recording birds, recording finches, or had an interest in illustrating finches or writing about finches, you name it. We called it a network because we wanted everybody to feel included. We have these iNaturalist projects, like I said, become a finch forecaster. We also have a Red Crossbill and evening grosbeak foraging project as well in iNaturalist. And I always keep saying, if you keep, you know, wellness for finches is wellness for you. You take care of your birds and your finches in your backyard, and you're going to get a lot of enjoyment out of that. And without all these photographs in this wonderful presentation from these photographers, this presentation wouldn't be possible. And that is all I have. I'll take questions at this moment.
All right. Well, thank you so much for everything, Matt. I really appreciate you being able to join us tonight. That was an incredible presentation, and I'm really glad we could get everything working with the sound. That really added so much to it to be able to hear all of the
Did.
calls. Um,
Hopefully
we
my
have
voice
time.
wasn't too bad.
No, no, everything went perfect. It went really
Good,
well. Um,
good.
we have time if there's a question or two people are interested in asking.
Oh, there's got to be some questions.
It always is.
Cool.
Oh, somebody's asking, what's the best way to keep a bird feeder clean?
Well, you kind of want to have a uh, hard solution of like bleach to water. You can find it on the Finch Research Network that goes into the exact ratios. We need to be cleaning them a lot more than we might realize. You really should be cleaning them once a month at least. A lot of times people don't clean them more than once or twice a year. That's really, again, it's a ratio of bleach to water. I think it's 4 to 1. But it might be 10 to 1. I might be getting a little late right now, and I may be mixing up the honey or the hummingbird solution mix. I think it's 10 to 1. It's one part. It's like a bottle cap of bleach to 10 parts water, and then you wash them out. But there are people. There's a company in the UK that reached out to me as part of my day job working for the birdseed industry. There might be a feeder coming where you can twist it off and throw it in a dishwasher or like a dishwasher. So we'll see what happens. But cleaning can be kind of laborious for sure. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, I think we had one other question that was people asking for similar looking species. Does the tree they're in help narrow it down or not? And then what was
Do we
else?
have a DNA database of finches? We
Yeah,
do. There is a, I don't know if the whole genome of all of the finches, I don't believe has been done, but there is a phylogenetic tree of the finches. So like, red poles are closely related to crossbills, actually. They're the closely related finch to crossbill is red pole. And there is a tree that you can look at. Now in the book, we don't dive deeply into the genetics because it tends to be a topic that people don't necessarily want. It can be kind of hard to read and understand, but we there is a phylogenetic tree, and like the purple finches I said, and I think there's probably two different species there. Uh, the genetics that's been done most recently, in like 10 years ago, does show that they've probably evolved, you know, many, many, many tens of thousands of years ago now. So there is a chance that that one is a full species. We'll see. But hey, if you I hope there are more geneticists out there because we need more diving into these questions. What is the best? What was that? I saw that
Well, there was a
question there.
question about whether birds congregating at feeders puts them at a greater risk um, of pathogens, whether finches are
Well, well, finches, it's interesting. Like I said, that's why I suggest cleaning. Finches are, probably one of the most largest cohort of birds at backyard feeders, and because of their sociality, they are more susceptible to disease. Um, with that said, though, I do think that, the more we clean them, or like I said, this person in the UK is working on hopefully he's kind of designed it to reduce contact with the feeder with like an eye or being able to like poop into your
Mhm.
tray, like a seed tray, where he's kind of designed a feeder where they poop off the edge
Oh, cool.
and not into the food. Could go a long way. Now, in the question like, you know, do feeders help birds? Now, the answer is particularly as you get into colder climates, feeders definitely help birds because of the temperatures and because of you get these freezing rain events or even rain events in cold temperatures can really lead to high mortality. But I do really encourage people to clean their feeders more than they probably do. So
All right. Well, I think that might be all the time we have this evening for questions, but thank you again so much, Matt. It was a really great presentation, and I
cool.
really appreciate you sharing your all your experience and all those wonderful stories and photos. And
Yeah,
yeah, if anyone has any more questions, please feel to reach out to me at outreach@oakridgesmarine.org, and I'll be happy to answer any of those. And all right, well, have a nice evening, everybody, and we'll chat with you all soon.